Alright, after a comfortably long wait, it's time to start my Bravely Default story retrospective, summary, big chunky boy. If you dropped in here on a whim, then first of all, hello. There's another video before this where I talk exclusively about Bravely Default as a game. So stuff like gameplay, aesthetic, music, etc. And I'd highly suggest watching that first so you can get some context behind why I want to spend X amount of time talking about this random 3DS JRPG. Since I want to talk about it in depth, it will be spoiler-filled, so you have been warned. Before moving on, I'd first of all like to make some corrections from part 1. Use this timecode to skip straight to the main video. Turns out, the character designer for Bravely Default 2 isn't Akihiko Yoshida. This time around, it's Naoki Ikushima from Octopath Traveler fame. An extraordinarily talented artist in his own right, and something which kinda blew my mind when I first found out, because I always assumed it was Yoshida who did the art for Octopath Traveler. I'm not sure if he's influenced by Yoshida or is simply trying to replicate Bravely's original style, but it's safe to say they chose the best person for the job, because they sure fooled me. Also, asterisks. Shut up, stop being mean to me. And whilst this isn't a correction, I somehow spent a fair number of years being a fan of Revo's work and never knew his band created this particular anime intro. The man is a god. Finally, this is addressing the video in general. A lot of the side stories in Bravely Default hold a lot of fantastic world building and character moments, but I won't be addressing them if they hold no relevance to the overarching story. This way, it will give people who want to give the game a go a metric ton of content that I haven't touched upon. Also, you know, brevity. What does that word mean? And so, with that out of the way, let's start this where all good things start. Right at the beginning. Or is it? How many times have we done this exactly? The introduction starts off with a small fairy judging us positively for our strong sense of duty, and makes us swear that whatever goal we set out to achieve, we'll see it all the way through to the end. In hindsight, I've come to appreciate this intro a lot more over the years. Not because of this alone, but due to how it all comes full circle alongside the accompanying scene, which makes multiple playthroughs all the more interesting.
Oh, hello. I see fire in those eyes.
If you say so.
The accompanying scene in question is this one, which you may remember me bringing up in part 1 as the glitchy thighs segment. When it works properly, it shows a young woman praying to anything that'll hear her, begging this unseen entity to help her and her friends as their last remaining hope, who are being hunted down by a malicious force. Before long, her time appears to run out, as a crack in the fabric of reality begins to pull her away. The last thing she asks the unseen entity is to become her warrior of light. Next up, we get a brief introduction to our 4 main characters before the cataclysmic events that connects all of them occurs. The one I'll be focusing on for now is this guy, Tiz Aurea, a simple farmer living in the village of Norende with his little brother. However, this tranquil life is brought abruptly to an end, as the village is struck by a ground-shattering earthquake, the entire populace falling into the abyss as Tiz holds helplessly onto his kid brother, before losing his grip and watching him fall to his death. Shortly after, Tiz is consumed by a large pillar of light that has erupted from the abyss where Norende once stood, and mysteriously finds himself in the bed of a neighbouring city's inn, being saved by the innkeeper's son. He's invited before the king due to his unique circumstances, and due to the tragedy of Norende, is allowed to stay in the city for as long as he needs. But time is of the essence, and there may be survivors, so he sets off to return to his old village. Much to his grief, not a single soul was spared. However, fate has brought him to a woman who will change his life forever. This is Agnes Oblige, and her companion, Aerie. The former being a vestal to the Wind Crystal, one of 4 powerful objects that exist within the world of Luxembourg, that serve to balance each corresponding element. The others being water, fire, and earth. If you've played any older Final Fantasy game, you'll get the gist. The fire crystal helps you with the cooking.
Beans.
The earth crystal predictably keeps the tectonic plates on a strict leash, and the water crystal makes it so you're swimming in a crystal clear lake instead of dive bombing into liquid poo. Agnes, being a vestal to the wind crystal, is in her words a priestess, bride, and servant to that specific crystal, living a secluded life with an entourage of nuns and dedicating all of their life praying and tending to the crystal, cleansing it of corruption so the world can know peace with no freak disasters. However, before she left on her journey, the wind Emerald Crystal was overtook by a sudden darkness, causing the winds to cease blowing. The seas are still and rotting, fires rage out of control, and, well, due to what we can assume to be the Earth Crystal, Nerende has turned out
deliciously holy.
Oh my god, that was so funny!
Confirming this with her own eyes gives our young Vestal a new mission: to set out and awaken the crystals with the help of her guide, the aforementioned Aerie, a Christ fairy who serves to assist Vestals in tending to, and in this case, awakening the crystals to their former glory, sparing them from darkness. However, there's another side to this story which will help introduce our final two cast members, and where this seemingly standard Final Fantasy-esque plot starts going somewhere very interesting. Agnes is being pursued by the Knights of Eternia, and that's not the name of a small band of miscreants. It's the entire goddamn Duchy of Eternia. The only reason they have to imprison her is they're convinced she's a threat, not just to Eternia, but the world. After being ambushed and defeating two of the members, Holly White and Baris Lair, they make it back to Caudisla, where a black mage and member of the Sky Knights, Ominous Crow, is burning down buildings in the city in order to find the Vestal. Adia Lee, daughter of the Grand Marshal of Eternia, scolds him for his harmful acts of vandalism before they leave to an empty fortress, expecting the Vestal to be handed over or to turn herself in so no one in the city gets hurt. This is where they encounter a strange young man, aka sex pervert, Ringabel, who insists on joining the duo on their journey for no other reason than the book by his side told him to do it.
Hey, kitten.
Dee's journal is a pretty useful tool that helps Ringabel and the party solve problems without really needing to stop and think about it. Things like, how do we achieve this goal, will be met with hyper-specific replies like,
I'll also mention that my journal states Agnes wore sexy clothes. It was awesome.
Where's the nearest 7-Eleven? We've seen that tree 4 times already.
my journal informs me we must take a left at the next intersection. How was Epstein murdered? One of the latest prophecies it shows to him is to join with Agnes and Tiz on their adventure, something he wants to do in order to track down his forgotten memories. Making it to the ruins, Adia continues to get frustrated at Ominous, who seems hell-bent on burning down more of the city to find the Vestal. However, when the Vestal suddenly shows up and Ominous shows his clear lack of morals when his own magic hits and potentially kills his own men, she takes him down in the name of justice, becoming a traitor to her homeland, but making 3 friends out of a debacle, so, you know, worth it. After this, she confronts her now ex-captain, unleashing her classic catchphrase, let's hear that again in Japanese, very fucking important, and, like Ominous, she strikes him down as well, discovering that her once respected comrades fall into what she views as very black and white. They are bad and she is justice. She'd just never seen it before because she was stuck in Eternia. And this black and white viewpoint is something which will follow Adia throughout the game, as she permanently joins the Vestal's party, on a journey to awaken the crystals and bring peace back to the world. A change which must have come as quite a shock for Adia, considering she was brought up in a land which believes strongly in anti-crystalism. This is the interesting part I was talking about. Through Adia, we learn about the philosophy of anti-crystalism, something which is relatively exclusive to Eternia but is bleeding into other lands thanks to Eternian influence. Whilst this is an ancient philosophy made approximately 1800 years ago, it's only exploded in popularity very recently in the timeline, and because of it, opinions of Vestals and their place in the world have been put in an extreme spotlight, being seen as nothing more than minions of the crystals, and preventing humanity from using the crystals for the bettering of the world through their own hands instead of being seen as objects of worship and reverence. You see, Eternia believe that crystals should be for the people, as evidenced by the fact that the Earth Crystal that is in their possession is being used to amplify white magic in medical facilities, making their country one of the best places to live if longevity of life is something you like the sound of. The entire humanitarian versus religious conflict that spreads itself throughout the game is really cool. I love the idea of taking a very standard Final Fantasy story regarding 4 elemental elemental crystals and having characters in the universe start to ask questions. They aren't gods, they're objects, and we have proof they can be used for the bettering of the human race. On the flip side, you have the crystal orthodoxy, who worship them as divine forces of nature because, well, that's exactly what they are. And forcefully taking down a religion that's been around for thousands of years will obviously cause quite a bit of turmoil. I mean, by removing the Vestal from tending to the crystal, this can potentially cause it to become unstable and trigger Final Fantasy Chernobyl if they aren't careful. So it's safe to say that things are a little messy. Now, in this story, we do follow a group who believe in the ways of the crystal orthodoxy, Agnes being someone who is deeply revered within the religion. And despite Eternia not necessarily being the bad guys in the end, they sure have a miserable fucking time proving it. Because we are playing a video game, we need to have a group of people who we see as the villains, accompanied with menacing music as they flaunt their way onto the screen, cocks in hand. And Eternia, for most of the game, definitely do a great job at being irredeemable pricks. After all, we need to feel like the people we're killing to death deserve it and fall in line with Adia's black and white ideology. Trust me, I'll go into a lot more detail about this particular segment later, but the actual length these people go in order to achieve their goals, some behind the backs of the Grand Marshal, are laughably villainous. Take for example Wallace Warcrime, who 4 years ago used chemical warfare to commit an act of genocide, and leaving the surrounding land completely uninhabitable for a majority of those years. And even though he's later punished, why in God's name did it take 4 years to do so? You can't just ooh sorry daddy, I made a fucky wucky with this kind of stuff, or people at the top are gonna come across as laughably incompetent.
Are we the baddies?
Moving on, let's jump straight into it with the Reawakening of the Wind Crystal. This entire chapter gives us some nice insight into the more insidious side of anti-crystalism. The King of Ankheim, who rules over the lands where Agnes tended to the crystal, claims that Agnes has simply abandoned the people and halting the winds on purpose, something which he absolutely knows isn't true and is doing so to gain more power, forcing the populace to turn the windmills that grant the city power by hand, even holding back water from civilians to line both his and his cohort's pockets. So they go to the Wind Temple, and turns out, whilst the temple was being ransacked to find her, all of the priestesses were murdered and the Vestal Garb needed to cleanse the crystal has been damaged. So they set off on a fetch quest to find the only man who can fix them, a sage by the name of Juliana, aka Sex Pervert.
Fine and plump and pleasantly jiggly.
He fixes Agnes's Vestal Garb, and we find out that a pendant that she wears around her neck at all times and is used to summon other players during gameplay was a gift from the sage back from when she was a child, and told her,
Have the courage to think and act on your own.
Have the courage to disobey.
put a pin in that. After this, we get a pretty touching scene, and it's the first time we really see Agnes as who she is. She might hold herself like a Vestal, but in reality, she's a hermit who's never left the temple and seen the outside world. It terrifies her, not just because of the onslaught of social interaction, but because a lot of it has been driven by hatred. People want to find her and kill her, and she doesn't understand why when all she wants to do is help. It was the first time I really acknowledged her character, because she let her guard down and reveals that underneath the title of Vestal is a terrified girl who's just as scared as everyone else.
And all the world's people, kings and commoners alike, their eyes bore into me, whether in expectation or disappointment. The weight is crushing. My shoulders are not broad enough to bear the weight of it. The hopes and fears of an army of strangers I've never so much as seen before. They frighten me.
With the Vestal Garb now repaired and saying their goodbyes to the sage, they finally have what they need to reawaken the crystal. And it's a fairly standard affair. Take care of a boss whose darkness is infesting it, listen to Ares' instruction which go as follows: no interrupting Agnes, and stop exactly when she tells you, or the crystal could break. Mash the X button until the repetitive strain injury starts to creep up your arm, and hey presto, you've got yourself a shiny boy, which will be registered here in Ares' brooch. Returning to Ankheim gives us another great Agnes moment as she uses her newfound confidence thanks to her friends and gives a pretty heartfelt speech that wins the heart of the people. Agnes's voice actress, Erin Fitzgerald, does a really good job here. And while sometimes it feels like she's been directed a little too hard to seem whimsical,
Agnes oblige.
She has her moments to truly shine in the role. This speech here is one of them.
The wind is coming. 2,000 years the Vestals have prayed. Their lives have been the crystal's nourishment. And now they feed the wind!
So with the wind's return and murdering the king in cold blood during a side mission because we're above the law, apparently.
I see. I regret my failure to see through the former king's misdeeds.
Where will the kingdom go from here? How will it function in the absence of its king?
Am I a joke to you? The party head off to awaken the water crystal, but not before they're visited by a character whose importance will only increase as the game continues. The Dark Knight, Altonus Dim, is a childhood friend and honest-to-God simp of Adia's. Wait, what? No, give that back! And finding out she's gone traitor doesn't exactly please him. He destroys the mechanism that allows the airship to fly and keeps us stuck in the ocean, virtually begging Adia to reconsider her position as he lets them escape just this once. Now, something I neglected to mention was the water vestal that was brought up during the Sage and Agnes's conversation, named Olivia. Olivia was Agnes's only friend when they were Vestalings. I said Vestalings, and has remained her only friend up until she met the party. However, after visiting the city of Florum, which is the closest to the water temple, they discover that Olivia has gone into hiding. And for the time being, it seems like they're stuck here. Now, Florum is a city composed entirely of women who are well known for their strict crystalism faith, modesty, and purity. But upon visiting, the party come to a horrifying conclusion. Some bastard has introduced the city's women to perfume, makeup, and hot, sexy boys. What are you doing here, Fernando? Ironically, despite this entire story arc feeling like it should be filler, where Agnes needs to participate in a beauty contest and try on revealing bikinis, only for Tiz to remind her that the real beauty comes from in here, and kinda making the whole bikini subplot seem completely irrelevant, until Adia needs to use it for a side quest, which can best be described as a horny stealth mission. Florum has a healthy selection of my favorite character interactions.
I was dazed by your hideous hair, and my hand slipped.
That awful cow dropped something.
Also, a word of warning, at this point in the game I made Ringabel a ranger because they decimate a lot of early game bosses, so you'll have to excuse him for being the muskiest husky for a good chunk of this video. Or if you're the furry category of my audience, you're welcome. One thing Bravely Default likes to do when you enter new areas is the party chat option, similar to how Tales of games do it. And it's where the game lets us experience a lot of the non-adventure related topics these 5 experience, including Airy. There's a lot of humour that's been pumped into the dialogue, whilst also allowing us to watch the group interact as friends with no serious goal pushing them. Like, thanks to Tiz being a country boy, he's not able to sleep due to Florum's fluorescent lighting flickering outside of his room, and Ringabel stumbling in drunk at 3 AM after his nightly escapades, Adia making him coffee, black of course, and Ringabel falling asleep in said coffee, Agnes having never seen a bow before, using it as a blunt weapon since she has no idea what an arrow is. Even Airy has some golden moments here or there, like her unfaltering hatred for children and the party telling her off for being 1, immature, and 2, getting into fights with actual baby boys.
Fuck, I could watch kids fall off bikes all day. I don't give a shit about your kid.
And remember the beauty contest I brought up earlier? Well, as fillery as that sounds, it actually serves a story purpose. See, if Agnes competes, then there's a large chance the water vestal Olivia will see or hear about it, allowing the party to meet with them. And whilst Agnes doesn't win, in fact she comes in last place due to dressing too modestly, Olivia still sees and sends a messenger. But overhearing the conversation are 2 of my least liked characters, Victoria and Victor, 2 higher ranking members of the Eternian forces. They follow the party to Olivia's hiding place, and after giving the 2 Vestals a heartwarming reunion, Victoria decides to crash the party and attempt to subdue Agnes, Olivia taking the fatal blow.
A slip of the hand. I'd meant only to mar that lovely face.
The party attempts to stop the duo, but they're far too strong, leaving us when Victoria has a seizure that forces them to flee. Olivia passes away in Agnes's arms, which sets off the events of the Fire Crystals arc after awakening the Water Crystal, where certain members of the party have a big falling out. You see, it's at this point where Adia lets slip that her father is the Grand Marshal of Eternia, and Agnes, having just lost one one of her oldest friends to the country, furiously accuses her of being a spy. This awkward tension will continue throughout Chapter 3, or as I like to call it, the Trauma Center. First things first, since the party can now sail across the ocean thanks to the water crystal's awakening, they discover a town-sized ship accurately named Grand Ship, which introduces us to Zats and later Dats, a couple of shield bearers fighting against the Sword Bearers, two opposing factions in a massive civil war. If you're wondering which one we'll be batting for, the shield bearers are crystallists who are protecting their home, and the Sword Bearers are an anti-crystalist faction who committed an act of genocide using an Eternian mercenary group. They didn't mean to, though. It was this guy who did it and wasn't punished until 4 years later. And enforce child labour in the local mines, so, you know, at this point I can kinda see why Adia has such a black and white mentality when it comes to good and evil. What is going on? Now, whilst the Shield Bearer, Sword Bearer storyline is good, for me, Chapter 3 is really the Tiz chapter, since it really allows us to get inside his head and see him as something other than a self-insert for the player. Remember when I brought up that segment earlier about Tiz having trouble sleeping? Well, it's not just due to fluorescent lights, and it is not just a one-time occurrence. Tiz is going through serious mental trauma about his little brother's death, and dreams about his expression as he fell into the abyss night after night. It's why, when he finds Aegil, a child slave kept within the mines, that his bad dreams slowly begin to stop. Because this kid reminds him so much of his little brother that it gives him a mote of peace.
I was going to see the fire vestal.
But that voice, I know I've heard that somewhere. Hold on.
Thank you for rescuing me. There's no one left in our village.
I know what you're probably expecting is disgust, considering what I've said about him in the past, but after all this time, I've actually kind of missed him. So not only do we have Agnes suffering through the trauma of losing her closest friend and taking her fury out on Adia, despite Adia proving through murdering her countrymen that she's to be trusted and coming across as aggressively stubborn at points. We also have Tiz, who's putting the adventure in jeopardy by refusing to put Aegil in harm's way, because Aegil knows a dangerous secret passage to the Fire Temple which has been surrounded by magma and only he can show us the way.
What then? You have been impossible lately, Tiz.
Irony. It's really nice being able to see Tiz in this light, because whilst he's always been the purest, softest little marshmallow boy whose legs start to shake when he realises he'll be in a city full of girls, or when Adia teases him and Agnes over their will they or won't they relationship.
Well, look at you, Tiz. You little charmer.
This makes him feel like he has some depth, and I'm honestly happy they brought this entire plotline back. I can just picture another game using it as a motivator and never talking about it again. Also, quick side note, I had to record this particular scene twice using the super handy event viewer because originally this happened. And while Tiz never completely gets over his trauma, he is able to sleep better at night thanks to his meeting with Aegil, and of course the help of his friends, who come rushing to his aid when he's forced to stare his nightmares right back in the face for a second time. Even Agnes, who's being pushed and pulled by Aerie to not put herself in danger, that her life belongs to not just her now, but to the world, and that if she dies, no one will awaken the crystals, she rushes in and is the final hand to save Tiz and Aegil from a fiery demise. After this, we get the apology we've waited for as the party hurry on to awaken the fire crystal. And after that's done, there's only one more crystal to awaken before the darkness is swept clean from the world. The issue is getting there. You see, you can't cross into Eternia by foot due to it being located behind steep and imposing mountains, and the only people who own airships in this world would seem to be part of the Duchy. Even the Eternians, who fear the Vestal awakening the crystals the most, don't seem too afraid. It's under their control after all, and in order to cross into Eternia, they'd need an airship capable of doing so.
A few minutes later,
they find an airship capable of doing so. Chapter 4, Black and White, or as it should be called.
Tell her the truth.
After making it past a few obstacles, we find ourselves in the city of Eternia, where an old classmate of Adia's drops some pretty somber news. Remember earlier when I mentioned Eternia's usage of the Earth Crystal, connecting it to hospitals and medical facilities? Well, turns out Adia's mother is in one of those medical facilities, and the party needs to awaken the crystal, which will, in turn, completely disable the white magic energy, dooming a hefty majority of the patients, including Adia's mother. Quite an intriguing dilemma, if I do say so myself. Even after going in and speaking with her mother, which goes down surprisingly well, Adia decides alongside Aerie that the best thing to do is to awaken the Earth Crystal. Eternia is unknowingly letting the rest of the world drown in darkness whilst they reap the benefits of the white magic. A really tough choice has to be made here. It's probably the biggest oh shit decision in the game, turning off an entire city's life support machine in order to stop the world's destruction. And so, with thoughts of cutting off Doris's oxygen supply fresh in our mind, we press onwards into the belly of the beast. As it turns out, the only way to access the Earth Crystal is to go straight into enemy territory. We encounter these two, Victoria has a seizure yet again, and we learn of her tragic backstory in order to justify her manic, murderous tendencies, which she very clearly revels in, and a clear inability to take orders from higher-ups, endangering not just the lives of innocents but the integrity of anti-crystalism as a whole.
I wish you'd all drop dead.
Victoria?
Oh my gosh, that must have been so hard for you. I guess I don't know my own strength, huh? Next up, we're knocked out by a vampire. No, I didn't stutter. Here he is, say hello, named Lester DeRosso. And surprisingly, he's one of the more crucial plot elements to be introduced into the game, and you won't find out why until the final boss. Sorry. With the party now imprisoned, Alternus informs the Grand Marshal that Adia's now in her room. So, you know, maybe they could talk things through. Maybe the Grand Marshal has some important things to tell Adia. Maybe, just maybe, you should tell your daughter about the thing that you know about the crystals that could serve as beneficial to our adventure.
Agnes, what will you do with her? You'll bring ruin upon Eternia if you harm a hair on her head.
You speak of ruin. It is you and your conspirators who nearly brought ruin upon this land.
Interesting. Tell me more. Can we talk about this Muppet for a second? The Grand Marshal, or Brave Lee as he's more commonly known, is kind of a dummy. Not just for the cheeky nudge nudge wink wink I just dropped, but more for his inability to speak to his daughter. 90% of all the problems in this game could just be solved if Brave had a voice. Instead, he feels more like a figurehead of authority rather than an actual leader. He just sits there and lets this painfully edgy conversation about who can draw their katana faster than the other go on for an uncomfortably long period of time before he hand waves them away because they're giving him a headache. I feel like the way Dairy Lee, Dunkable, and a few of the other character segments are written are by far my least favourite things in the game. Whilst Brave might give his troops a lot of leeway, it's perhaps a little too much leeway. Like, reel it back, folks. We're here to spread the word of anti-crystalism. By force, if necessary, but not by brainwashing an entire city of women by slaughtering fairies for their wings and getting sick pleasure out of watching two little girls kill each other because of the toxins, defiling sacred religious areas, and even seduce an unknown number of these women using said toxins only to lock them up in a dungeon and use them to gain more political power and potentially usurp Brave himself. Like, you might put a lot of trust in your people, but a good portion of them don't respect you, and clearly need babysitters or life behind bars. Now, admittedly, the game wouldn't exist if he just talked to his daughter, but please, a crumb of legitimate control over your armies? At this point, even knowing what I know, of course I'm siding with Adia here. Why wouldn't I when you won't
Tell her the truth.
I don't understand. I just don't understand.
Right? Also, slight tangent, but I'm sure you've noticed the Bravely team's insistence on using puns to name their characters. To name a few, Victoria F. Stein is a spin on Frankenstein due to her always being experimented on. Victor S. Court, because he's her escort. Adia Lee is a pun on Ideally due to the ideals that she holds onto so strongly. Sigma Kint is an anagram for Magic Knight. And my personal favourite is Adia's mother, Marza Lee. Now, playful eye rolls aside, I do think this is cute. I think it adds to the series' charm. People already getting ready to deconstruct Bravely 2's names and see if they can predict what their arcs might be. But the realistic side of my brain can't help but think how this universe typecasts you pretty hard after you're named at birth. All I'm saying is, rich, girthy, huge dong must be pretty thankful to his parents right about now, which is the least I can say for guest off to canines. How can we beat him, Chief? He's just too strong. Don't worry, I have just the man for the job. Now, prison time. Harmonica's out, F's in chat. The gang are hatching a plan to use Aerie to grab a key from the guard to let them out, and of course, she's being a baby about it. But thankfully, Adia has a secret way out of her room that lands her, wouldn't you know it, straight to the dungeons. She releases everyone only to find Sage Juliana at the end, who, it turns out, is the co-founder of the council that preceded the Duchy of Eternia, meaning he's one of the founding fathers of anti-crystalism, alongside Lord Lester de Rosso. The party are understandably a little standoffish about this, but the sage remains his ever-friendly self, telling us that the path to ruin can often be paved by good intentions, and repeats what he said to Agnes when she was a child. Have the courage to think and act on your own. Have the courage to disobey. At this point, he actually lets us past, saying that he'll always be watching over us. With the Wind Vestal getting ever closer, Brave realizes that his time might be up, and decides for the first time in his life to use his big boy words and spoils the story for Ultimus Dim, then tasking him with one of the single most important missions of his life. Prepare for the worst, find the Pillar of Light, and be victorious. Anyways, upon reaching Brave, he doesn't tell the party any of the useful information that might stop us from reaching the Earth Crystal. So we defeat him, leaving him unfortunately crippled, and get confirmation from Lester that thanks to Adia's father, medical science has advanced by hundreds of years within the duchy, and so her mother won't die if the White Mage facility shut down. Now, maybe it's because I'm a massive fan of games like these that I was a little bummed out they chickened out over this particular twist. Hashtag let Adia's mother experience the sweet embrace of death so I can feel really bad for a day or two, please and thank you. Surprisingly, Lester, like the Sage, also lets us pass to awaken the Earth Crystal. After a short button mash, we have achieved our goal. All of the crystals are awakened, which means, according to Aerie, a Pillar of Light has appeared somewhere in the world. We need to take the Christ Fairy into the pillar, where she'll use her completed brooch to wash darkness away from the world, and permanently close the cavern. Will it work? Well, we don't know. Even Aerie doesn't, as this is her first time doing it. A lot of risk for potentially no reward. When we're inside the pillar and Aerie begins her meditation, we're suddenly assailed by none other than Ultimus Dim, who is hell-bent on stopping us thanks to the secret that he now knows. We beat him, shattering his helmet and revealing... As Ultimus Dim backs off towards the edge of the ship, he just now notices the man fighting alongside Adia, questioning who he is. It's important to note that Ringabel had coincidentally been away as Ultimus first encountered the group, and with a violent lurch of the ship, Ultimus falls into the pillar, dropping his journal as he does so, with the all too familiar initial of D on the front. At this point, the ship starts losing control as the pillar consumes them, and without warning, we're brought hurtling into Chapter 5. And so, with that out of the way, let's start this where all good things start, right at the beginning. Or is it? How many times have we done this exactly? Now this is a turning point in the game for sure, and it's also where opinions of the game start to get incredibly mixed. As I said in part 1, this is such a shame because it completely redeems itself during the final chapter in my opinion. But for a lot of people, even those writing the online guides apparently, like seriously I checked out 2 and they just gave up, and the ones that stuck around are like, don't give up, 'cause you They wanted to get off the developer's wild ride whilst things were nice and slow. I'll get straight to the issue people have with these next few chapters, because it starts off in an interesting way. Much to Aerie's confusion, the ritual didn't work. Or at least she thinks it didn't, since time has apparently been reverted back to the very beginning of the game. Since this was her first time attempting it, she's just as confused as the rest of the party. And after a lot of back and forthing, they come up with a unanimous decision. Awaken the crystals. Again. You know what? Fair enough. We have an airship now, and if we want, we can revisit all of the side stories and get even more information and backstory on some of the Asterix holders that really open them up and make them feel like actual characters instead of one-dimensional villains. You've still got to get to 2 of the more frustrating temples by foot since they're located within dungeons, but hey, no matter. Beat the bosses, wake up the crystals, find the Pillar of Light, fight Ultimus, and hopefully, this time, Aerie can pull it off.
Good morning. Time to wake up. Come now. That's it.
Maybe zoom in. I'm about to start crying. I feel like I'm untouched by an angel right now. Look.
Don't give up, 'cause you have friends.
Nope, it's a failure yet again, meaning we need to, you guessed it, reawaken all 4 crystals. This is a process which you can skip if you want to, by pushing the crystals to their breaking point, at which point you'll go straight to the final boss and you'll get an ending. This ending is known as the false ending, however, and in order to get the true ending, you'll need to reawaken 16 crystals, beat 16 bosses. All of these are the same defenders of the original crystals, just slightly stronger upon each new chapter, all spanning over 4 different variations of Luxembourg, button mashing included. If I didn't have repetitive strain injury, I certainly do now. Now I'm going to try and guess what the devs were thinking here, because this is absolutely by design. Remember when I brought up Sage Ulyana's little saying that he taught to Agnes? Have the courage to think and act on your own. Have the courage to disobey. Well, this is what a lot of people would assume had to do with the process of awakening the crystals, because throughout these 4 chapters, they all raise suspicions about it. Ringabel flat out saying, now I'm not saying do it, but wouldn't it be funny if we push the crystals further than Aerie tells us to? You know, as a joke. Even the Sage continues to shove you in the direction of destroying them, by telling Tiz and Agnes, and this is important, put yet another pin in this, that her pendant is actually the core of a destroyed crystal, and that crystals will naturally grow back to their original state through the power of mortal hopes and dreams. Meaning there's even less of a threat than we were first taught. And so, after being bored out of your mind with reawakening crystal after crystal, you'd naturally let curiosity take the wheel. Problem is that this isn't the true ending. What you actually need to do, you, the player, is to ignore these hints and keep awakening the crystals, which I guess is thinking and acting on your own, sure, but
it's a bit boring, isn't it?
I understand and actually defend people dropping the game around these chapters, because it's not executed perfectly. As I continue the summary, you'll see that there are unique pieces of dialogue and content to experience in these chapters to serve as incentives to keep you pushing forward, and some really brilliant twists and turns that kept me invested enough to continue. But I'd be lying if I said that even knowing how to get to the true ending under my belt, I still felt like I was doing something wrong. Characters will often repeat lines of dialogue over and over again. This repeated dialogue had me going, surely I'm doing something wrong here, only to go to Google and get confirmation that I'm on the right path. It's just strange. It's not wholly unforgivable, but I did find myself getting pretty bored after a while. And for some people, that's enough of a crime to stop playing altogether. It's as if you've been walking on a fairly consistent line of quality and you can see the ending in sight. But suddenly, out from the heavens, greetings, my children. I'm David Bowie from the hit movie Labyrinth, and I have yet one more task for you. You must cross the bog of eternal stench before you reach the promised land. Dare you take on my challenge? No, David Bowie. I've watched that movie, and I know that if I step in the bog, I'll smell like shit forever. So thank you, but no thank you. Meanwhile, the ones who brave the bog and reach the ending see a beautiful vista that stretches on for miles. And while some of them say the view was completely worth the trek, you still have a handful going, wow, thanks David Bowie, but I wish you didn't add the big river of poo. do. See you later, David Bowie. Bye! I do think this could be salvaged though if we get Bravely Default posted to the Switch, and it really boils down to quality of life. Give us the option where we don't need to trawl through the dungeons in order to reach crystals and place us directly at the crystal itself. Have an option to either manually button mash to awaken the crystal and an option to skip it, so players can still experience the false ending if they want to. Re-record some more dialogue so we don't get repeated lines, maybe hinting even further into our characters growing suspicious and worries outside of Ring a Bell. These wouldn't fix things completely, but it'd still give us the intended feeling the devs presumably wanted us to feel, wondering if we're doing the right thing and a feeling of a never-ending loop. Little fixes that may be seen as blasphemous to some people. This could potentially be what the devs didn't envision, but that's why I think having them as options can still have the pure method of completing the game hard-baked into it for people who don't see a problem with how the original dealt with things. I love this game, and I want more people to love it. All of it. Not just the first 4 chapters. I want the words "I love Bravely Default story" but to be wiped from history. Also, one big hot gamer tip from me to you. Once you get to these chapters, utilize this option that the devs have given to you and turn off encounters. Trust me, you can level up later if you feel underpowered, but it'll save you a lot of potential headaches if you can just get from point A to point B without any interruptions. Right, with the infamous method of completing the game out of the way, let's continue with the summary. Confused and dazed, the characters wander around the world, awakening crystals with confidence that can best be described as
I'm not always as confident as I look.
They decide to visit the sage again to patch up Agnes's Vestal garb, and she asks him if he's ever met her before. He responds that this is now the 3rd time. Well, that's strange, because he's met her once as a child, and he's met her just now. So when was the 3rd? At this point, he calls out the party and tells them that they're from another world. This means we aren't simply going back in time, but we're traveling to different dimensions every time we enter the pillar, going to alternate versions of Luxembourg. Asking the party a string of security questions, such as knowing about Lester de Rosso and his connection to the Duchy of Eternia, he invites Agnes and a single trusted ally to speak with him in the Vestment Cave. She chooses Tiz, which gets a playful nudge and wink from Ringabel and Adia, who've been adorably stoking the fires of their blossoming affection right from the start, whilst Aerie throws a hissy fit that she isn't chosen as the favourite.
Stop acting like a brat and give them a proper seeing off, Aerie.
You're
Come
nothing.
on, get
You're
going on.
dirt.
We'll be back
Fuck
soon.
you.
Take your time.
Fuck you.
One thing I feel like mentioning whilst I'm on the topic of the duo's romance is the track that plays here, Beneath the Hollow Moon, a theme I see as belonging to both Tiz and Agnes, as it mixes the instruments of their special moves, Tiz's being the flute and Agnes the violin, and it gives us this really beautiful harmony. So, taking Tiz, they arrive deep within the cave, where Juliana can finally reveal the truth of anti-crystalism. Grab some chalky milk or something, because this isn't something I can easily explain with 2 sentences. So please, sit comfortably as I tell you all a story. Once upon a time, almost 2,400 years ago, there was a man named Lester de Rosso, a former cleric of the Crystal Adventists, something which came before the Orthodoxy and would later be known as the Old Faith. He was a man who served king and country, an Eternian king to be specific, something which existed before the duchy was formed. Powers that would later become the Crystal Orthodoxy believed that they should be the ones to control all of the world crystals, instead of having each individual one being controlled by a kingdom. And so, as the Orthodoxy gained power, the Adventist way of life was dismantled, and the Eternian royal family bent the knee. Despite DeRosso being given the respectable role of Cardinal, he would later unfairly lose this position when he needed to vote for a Grand Patriarch, and refused to collaborate with a fellow Cardinal who wanted him to change his vote to further the man's ideals. This would have more repercussions, however, as a four-state coalition was formed by the Orthodoxy in order to take the Earth Crystal by force, completely dismantling the royal family, all because the Orthodoxy spun a lie about the king planning on upholding the ideals of Adventism. The DeRosso household was also violently taken down, DeRosso's father being murdered in cold blood. And while civilians were using the mansion as a safe house, the waters were poisoned and they were forced to starve. Lester, in desperation, sent his mother as a ransom payment, but to his horror, his ex-fellow cardinal was now a leading officer of the Orthodoxy, and refused his surrender out of spite, murdering his mother in the process. And so, in Lester's grief, he burnt down his home, intending to go down with it, until he heard a voice.
Accept me, and I shall grant life everlasting. Though it shall be filled with grief, thou shalt have all eternity to wreak vengeance upon thine enemies.
He took the mysterious voice's offer and became an immortal, and the Orthodoxy, fear-stricken that they couldn't find his body, would perpetuate a lie that the DeRosso family were nothing more than ghoulish vampires. A lie that Lester would run with, using that fear as a weapon of vengeance. He would use this immortality and power to fight an endless religious war with whatever remaining Adventists were left, assassinating the corrupt Grand Patriarch and the officer that scorned him, and clashing hundreds if not thousands of times with the High Inquisitor of the Crystal Orthodoxy, a man who would later be known as Sage Juliana. After countless fights which were so devastating they would literally terraform the land, they were stopped in their tracks when an angel appeared before them. This angel, close to death, told Lester and Juliana about the Evil One, which was looking to bring about the Harrowing, something which will ultimately not only destroy the world, but worlds upon worlds upon worlds, as the bringer of ruin is summoned into existence. She leaves them with signs of this harrowing and grants a task to the immortal, as only an immortal can fulfill it. The angel would later pass away due to her wounds. But the strangest thing of all is the two men would later meet a woman 1800 years later who looks exactly like her. This encounter immediately stopped all fighting between the two, as they discussed for days and nights what they needed to do. Lester would fake his own death, and Juliana, who killed the vampire Lester DeRosso, was promoted to Archbishop, something which he used to his advantage in order to separate the pure of heart from the corruption of the Orthodoxy. The pure people he refers to are the Vestals, and Juliana waited for hundreds of years before the first of the angel's prophecies came true. The lands of Eternia were thrust into the sky, isolating themselves from the world due to airships not existing at the time. At this point, the water, fire, and wind crystals rule were returned to their temples and the Vestals, Juliana mentoring them ever since and ensuring they remained free of the faith's internal corruption, and creating what is more commonly known as Crystalism today. It would take even more years for the angel's second prophecy to come true, that being a Great Plague, and that was a sign to Lester and Juliana to properly set the stage for the grand uprising of anti-Crystalism, enlisting the help of a former cleric of the Orthodoxy, Brave Lee, to become a figurehead of the movement, due to the Orthodoxy's complete unwillingness to assist in saving the vulnerable as the plague swept across Eternia, wiping out Brave's entire village and killing all of his loved ones. They would also teach him about the angel's prophecies and the identity of the Evil One, further enforcing his anti-crystalist ideals. However, Brave would take things a few steps further, after finding out that the Orthodoxy were about to enact a grand ritual, a forbidden practice that could put the Earth Crystal, and by extension all of Luxembourg, in great danger, in an effort to regain their lost power. It's at this point where Brave would overthrow the orthodoxy, thus establishing anti-crystalism as a legitimate philosophy, and ensuring that the Earth crystal was under Eternian control, so it would never fall to darkness, and would cause all of the other angels' prophecies to come true, and halting the Bringer of Ruin's plan to destroy all worlds as we know it. So yeah, that's anti-crystalism. It was definitely a little surprising being hit in the face of all of this mouth-watering world building, but I always found it a little disappointing that Lester just dumps all of this on you with no flashbacks or cutscenes. But thanks to my Patreon, I love you all so much, thank you, I was able to commission a whole comic book's worth of images from Sylphie to bring my little fantasy into reality. If you want to help support me, then follow the link down below and drop a pledge. Also, Sylphie's stuff is down below too, please follow her. She is amazingly talented. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, with that knowledge under your belt, it's time to press on with the little nuggets of information that these upcoming chapters will sprinkle you with, before the ultimate grand finale. The first time you need to go reawaken all of the crystals and make it to the Pillar of Light, you're confronted by Ultinus yet again. However, this time, he's much more blunt about his target.
Where is she?
Who do you mean?
Where is that peculiar fairy? Do you know that fairy's true objective? She intends to let the power of the crystals run wild. You have all fallen for her ruse. That includes you, Winged Vestal.
Beating Ultinus and watching him plummet into the pillar causes some of Ringabel's memories to return, specifically one about Adia being killed by an unknown horror. And stranger still, the number 6. Pushing forward, he admits to Tiz that he is indeed an alternate version of Ultinus Dim. However, this unfortunately does have to put a massive question mark over why Adia didn't recognize him since they're childhood friends? Am I supposed to assume this big Melvin had his helmet on the entire time? But that's not the only bombshell our dandy little pervert has for us. He slowly but surely begins to regain all of his memories. And with those memories comes some harsh truths. The number 6 was on Ares' wings before he lost his memory. Then, in our dimension, her wings show us the number 5. After the next pillar, it's 4, then 3. It's a countdown, and it was most likely Ares that killed Adia in his regained memory. Now, when you exit out into the main menu, the title, which originally read Bravely Default Where the Fairy Flies, now reads Bravely Default Aerie Lies.
Oh my god!
With the knowledge that Aerie is a slippery, slimy snake, Tiz is tasked by Ringabel to find a quiet place with Agnes to break the news to her. After all, she was the one closest to Aerie in the first place. Using the sage's meeting place within the cave, which is in the next dimension over, Tiz drops the news to her and the sage confirms it. Aerie is the evil one from the angel's prophecy, and is awakening the crystals to link each parallel version of Luxemdark together to bring about the harrowing. What the harrowing is, even the sage doesn't know. Now this does bring into question why the sage didn't just tell us the truth, but I wonder what would have happened if he did. It could have ended with our premature deaths if he just blurted it out in front of Aerie. So I guess I'll give him a pass. However, that being said, why didn't Brave tell Adia when they were completely isolated? The dreaded evil one is down in the dungeon with Agnes and you told Ultinus about Aerie but refused to tell your daughter out of what? Pride? Why are you so bad at everything you do?
The end is nigh. But at least I still have my warrior's honor.
This is like a beautiful blend of hyperbole and genuine lip-biting frustration. I cannot comprehend this man.
I just don't understand.
Now at this point, some of you may be asking, if they know Aerie is the evil one, why does getting the true ending require you continue to reawaken the crystals, knowing that it'll bring about the harrowing and the bringer of ruin? And the honest answer is, you kind of have to assume they're doing it for the greater good. Go directly directly to the source of all of this madness and defeat it, stopping this from ever happening again. Even if they grab Ares' head like a grape and squeeze, what's to stop the Bringer of Ruin from sending another Ares hundreds of thousands of years into the future and continue this cycle again? That being said, there are still things which occur thanks to the linking of worlds and questions the party have no answers for, which make this either a noble act of sacrifice or a very stupid stab in the dark. Remember when the Rende was decimated in the beginning? This was because of a previous version of the party entering the Holy Pillar and linking it with this world, which means, technically, it was the party who inadvertently wiped out an entire village of people, including Tiz's little brother, and in some cases, Tiz himself. Agnes is beside herself when she realizes this, apologizing to Tiz through shaking tears whilst Ares is in a state of meditation. This sacrifice is similar to the white magic situation in Eternia, except the consequences do turn out to be genuine. People do die. And if we're going by the assumption that the party wants to finish off the Bringer of Ruin, who's to say what the Harrowing will do? Even Yuliana doesn't know. Hypothetically, once Ares' countdown reaches 0, the previous worlds could be wiped of all life instantaneously, or the Bringer of Ruin can simply destroy every linked world at once, wiping out all sentient life on them, leaving the party with an empty yet safe cosmos after the fact. Basically, I think I know what the writers were going for, but the lack of real answers makes this a potentially disastrous leap of faith. Anyways, before the grand finale, Yuliana has one final test for us. A test of will, because in this world, it's practically ideal for each party member. Altanis has vanished, and Adia finally has validation from her family after thinking she passed away, meaning they both have a place to call home. Olivia is alive and well, and Tiz's little brother survived in this world, with Tiz being the one to fall into the chasm. But despite this world being seemingly perfect for everyone, they all unanimously agree that the suffering they've been through has made them the people they are today. And the people they hold dearest of all are each other. And so, with that in mind, they continue pushing forward, determined to see this nightmare to its conclusion.
I did it!
Finally, after all that work, the party assumes that the chasm is now closed, and rushes to see the fruits of their labour. However, Aerie reveals that it was all a prank, which definitely brings up even more questions, like why some of the party are all of a sudden shocked and confused that Aerie is the real villain. And truth be told, I feel a lot of people don't get this moment either. A lot of theories have risen, like how the party just didn't want to admit it and kept going in the hopes it wasn't true, or the one I always stuck with, which is maybe they lost their memories of her betrayal after they entered the final pillar in a similar way to how Ringabel lost his. But then I remember that only Ringabel has shown symptoms of this, and entering the pillar has given none of the other characters any hint that they might have some varying level of amnesia. The most frustrating thing about this is there's a lot of guessing that fans, including myself, have to come up with to distract us from the fact that some parts of Bravely Default might have been written badly or badly constructed. This could have been a genuine mistake, but we don't know. Sometimes it's better to put your hands in the air and admit to yourself, I wish parts of this game could have been better. Thankfully, this is the last issue I have with the title, and from this point on, we have left the Bog of Eternal Stench, and have reached the land of milk and honey. Ares' plan has finally been realised. After linking tens of thousands of worlds and slaughtering countless alternate versions of the party, the stage has now been set for the Bringer of Ruin to make his ascent to the Celestial Realm. Just what is the Celestial Realm? We'll be finding that out very soon.
I suppose you need some convincing, and I can't do that in this form.
Harry, are you... No, it can't...
I am Aaron, demolisher world bounds. Faithful servant to his malevolence, the wrongfulness, god of destruction.
Am I the only one one who's always pronounced it Ouroboros? Have I been embarrassing myself all of these years? But that aside, Eri finally sheds her deceiver's skin and reveals the horror beneath. Because after linking countless looks and darks together, and after 1100 million years, she's become quite the powerful little eldritch horror.
We first met on that precipice, overlooking the great chasm. You had come forth from the chasm's depths, but you had only just slain us. Our blood had yet to dry.
Indeed, you have served me well. Now, die a bitter death, knowing you served your enemy.
But surprisingly, she isn't powerful enough, as she's beaten back by the party for the first time in all of these countless loops that she's been through. Out of fear, she escapes into the Norende Chasm, begging her master Ouroboros for a stronger form. We give chase and find ourselves in the Dark Aurora, one of the strangest looking dungeons in the game, largely due to a lot of real-world elements that are mysteriously lodged inside. This isn't the first time elements of our world have found their way into Bravely Default. I have kept these from you for this specific moment. The summon spells in this game are, all except one who's just a lady, are all based on things we'd see in our day-to-day life. A scorpion holding a town on its back? Is it a bird? Is it a plane? It's fucking both. A film reel spider thing? Choo-choo train of doom? And of course, Pylon Paul. Thing is, all of these summons, this location, and upcoming revelations are all tied to events in the game, and it's by far one of Bravely Default's more outlandish twists. Pushing through the Dark Aurora, we finally make it to Eri, where she begs Ouroboros to grant her more powers, something she receives, finally hatching into her true form. And so, after a game's worth of deceit, we can finally take down our old friend, with a battle theme which rivals some of the very best that the genre has to offer. During the fight, she'll use powerful spells such as Zeta Flare, meaning Eri is yet another character to add to the Donald Duck is the single most powerful character in Final Fantasy related media chart, and when she's brought close to death, Ouroboros will bring her back to full health. But after a while, he grows tired of her repeated failures, and his generosity runs out, summoning her into the infernal realm where she's devoured without mercy. And so ends the life of who I see as the main villain of Bravely Default. Because ya boy Ouroboros definitely feels like he's there to fulfill that nostalgia quota. He's the Zeramus or Necron of the game, an ancient evil you discover close to completing the title. And whilst this isn't a bad thing, I still felt more satisfaction seeing Eri's defeat than his. In fact, you could say I wanted Ouroboros defeated simply to stick a middle finger up to Eri's plans. Still, he is by no means a pushover. I grinded to level 99 and he was still able to wipe out my party. He definitely lives up to his title, Bringer of Ruin. Ouroboros first appears to us in the form of each party member, confidently mocking us as you'd expect a big nasty villain would, and claiming that Eri and each individual world merely serve as food to be consumed, on his grand ascent into the celestial realm, using each world as a stepping stone of sorts. He does give them a consolation prize in the form of a Q&A, and maybe it's just me, but this part got an unintentional laugh.
Just who are? How did Eri fit into your plan?
Ringabel and Tears are the ones to ask decent questions regarding the Celestial Realm and his planned invasion of it. This place is, in Ouroboros' words, the realm of the gods, and it is prosperous, full of love, beneficent, reverential, and orderly. Something he wants to turn upside down because he's not very nice. I guess if you're immortal, you gotta have goals. We stand a man with a dream. The strangest thing he reveals to us is that Tiz is harboring a celestial inside him as we speak. What? This is something which is hinted at only once in the game whilst we obtain the Summoner's Asterisk. You know, someone who can summon spirits which have fragments of our world. Very mysterious, Hand-on-Chin. What could it mean? Finally, after a comfortably sized villain's monologue, we take down his first form, which is actually pretty cool. He'll only attack you with moves that you currently have within your party, meaning it can potentially change depending on what job you fight him with. Standing your ground, he drags you into the Infernal Realm, where the proper final fight begins. Ouroboros is the god of destruction, and with that comes immortality. There's no way to bring him down by ourselves, and this is where Lester de Rosso comes in. Fulfilling his promise to the angel, he bids farewell to the party as he plans to merge with Ouroboros' core, but not before making an important connection.
Accept me, and I shall grant life everlasting. Though it shall be filled with grief, thou shalt have all eternity to wreak vengeance upon thine enemies.
With the immortality time loop now complete, he merges with Ouroboros, making the god mortal, and sadly killing Lester in the process. Now, as we continue, we realize that the now mortal god is still too powerful, as he begins to consume the countless number of planets that Aerie had connected. This causes Agnes to break down and offer her life to the god, which he gleefully accepts, but not before the voice of the angel reaches out to us, telling us that we're not alone, and for Tiz, child of the celestial light, to take Agnes's hand and call out to the myriad other worlds, where countless numbers of the party exist. They do this by using Agnes's pendant. This, if you remember, is a crystal's core, and crystals connect each of these dimensions together, even using it to summon help from other players, meaning that the countless other variations of the party from all across the multiverse have a single object to pour all of their hopes and dreams into. At this point, the worlds of your 3DS friends who own Bravely Default will be called into action, all of them lending their power to break the links that Aerie created, severing Ouroboros' hold over them and creating a big, bountiful spirit bomb of friendship inside of the pendant that is sent hurtling at the god, further damaging him whilst the orgasmic peak of the song reaches its highest point as the individual theme tunes are mixed and combined. It's all come full circle, baby! But that's not the end of it. Ouroboros tears through the goddamn barriers of reality and reveals to us a glimpse of the celestial realm. And what do we see but me?
A rat!
That's right, the celestial realm was the real world the entire time, and you are one of the Celestials, watching down over the battle that's unfolding using the 3DS camera. Finally, however, after a long and grueling battle, you deal the finishing blow on Ouroboros, still gloating that he'll reach his goal, seemingly unaware that the end is nigh. Also, the celestial realm. It's all of that, is it? Are you fucking sure, my dude? Are you absolutely crystal clear? Eh? The Warriors of Light have fulfilled their goal, and they're rescued by an unseen force, brought safely back to the bridge of their ship. The sage praises them for their victory and laments the passing of De Rosso, as he opens a pathway back to their original world. At this point, we get the finishing montage. Adia returns home to her family with open arms. Ringabel returns back to his original world where he failed to rescue Adia. Agnes returns to her peaceful life as a Vestal as the crystals still need to be maintained. And Tiz, well, I need to point out that this is a theory, but it is a very common theory. Common enough that people almost treat it as canon at this point? We're given no direct answer, but the game does leave us a lot of hints. See, Tiz either died or was left comatose during the Pillar of Light incident at the start of the game. It was thanks to this fairy, who it turns out isn't Aerie at all, but Anna, the twin sister of Aerie, who makes a comeback in the sequel, and Agnes using her pendant, calling out for help and reaching us in the celestial realm, that he was able to continue for as long as he has. We were literally controlling him and keeping him alive. And so, whilst looking at the graves of the people of Norende, he releases us from his body, and he passes back into his comatose state. We've helped him save the world, and have fulfilled our promise. But before the game ends, the devs wanted us to have a little more fun with the 3DS software, as you can see here. Tiz, being contained within a healing chamber and being held by an unknown group of people, is suddenly rescued by a self-appointed ball buster. No, I'm not kidding. Named Magnolia Arch. What happens next? Well, we have a long journey ahead of us, ladies and gentlemen. A very long journey indeed. Bravely Default will always be a game I hold close to my heart, which may sound strange after all of the criticisms I've thrown its way. Those final few chapters are packed with issues both related to the game itself and the story. As I said in the very beginning in part 1, if you turn your brain on whilst playing, you're gonna be questioning a lot of what goes on. Some of the character motives don't make a lick of sense, and whilst the writing staff were clearly very ambitious with the twists and turns, a majority of them would cause a trypophobia to flee to the hills due to all of the tightly packed holes. But when you have a party as lovable and tightly knit as these lot, and when a good 80% of the game knocks it out of the park with amazing character moments, tight gameplay from start to finish, and a genuine sense of respect for older Final Fantasy titles, whilst trying to give players a unique experience they may have never encountered in a game like this, and with the penultimate and final boss of the game giving me some of the most challenge and fun I've had with a JRPG finale in decades, it leaves me accepting the game's flaws as what they are. They're problems, yes, and it sucks that they're there, but they don't ruin the overall experience for me. I know this may not be the case for many people, and as I said, I understand. Not everyone is as forgiving, and I don't mean that as a detriment. Personally, however, this will always be something I'll recommend to everyone, whilst also warning them of the glaring flaws that lie within. And I truly hope that if you pick this game up due to these videos, that you end up loving the series as much as I do. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that all of you who pick up Bravely Default 2 will have a really great time. And so, with that out of the way, let's start this where all good things start. Right at the beginning. Or is it? How many times have we done this exactly? Hey folks, before I let the credit music fill your ears uninterrupted, I'd first like to thank some patrons who made this whole thing possible. Those being Keith Lawson, Mr. Sign, Kimberly Bryden, and Alice Reed. I'm now off to sleep for the next decade. This video definitely left me a little winded, but I really hope you enjoyed it. Stay safe, and I'll catch you all next time.